In the vast silence between stars, time moves differently. It pools in the dark spaces where light has never traveled, gathering weight like water behind an ancient dam. It whispers through nebulae that have watched the birth and death of 10,000 civilizations. It remembers what the living have forgotten. I have lived long enough to understand this now. Long enough to know that the universe keeps its own counsel, and that the patterns we call history are merely the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of chaos. My name is Villanis Kethran, and I was old when your species was still painting on cave walls. The Volanthi hegemony had stood for 11,000 years when I first heard the word human. We had mapped the spiral arm, catalogued 62 sentient species, and established trade routes that spanned distances your early astronomers could not have imagined. Our cities floated in the coronas of stars. Our ships moved through folded space like thoughts passing between neurons. Our art, our philosophy, our understanding of the cosmos, we believed we had achieved a kind of perfection. We were fools, but we would not understand that for centuries yet. I remember the first survey report that crossed my desk. I was serving as third coordinator of peripheral species assessment, a position of modest prestige that mostly involved cataloging primitive worlds for future consideration. Earth was flagged as Class 7, pre-spaceflight, tribal, fragmented into thousands of warring factions. The survey team had spent 3 rotations in orbit, documenting what they found. Their conclusion was succinct: no strategic value, recommend minimal observation. Species demonstrates high aggression but limited cooperative capacity. Unlikely to achieve interstellar presence within standard projection window. I signed off on the report without reading past the summary. We received hundreds of such assessments each cycle. Earth was unremarkable in every way that mattered to us. That was 800 of your years ago. I did not think about Earth again until everything began to fall apart. The first sign of the consuming dark came from the galactic rim, where our oldest colonies watched the void between galaxies. A research station went silent, then another. Then an entire mining network spanning 3 systems simply ceased to exist. We sent scout fleets. They vanished. We sent war fleets. They vanished faster. By the time the hegemony's High Council convened to discuss the crisis, we had already lost 11 worlds. The horror of it was unlike anything in our recorded history. This was not war as we understood it. There were no demands, no negotiations, no enemy to parley with. The consuming dark was exactly what its name suggested: an absence, an erasure, a hunger that moved through space and left nothing behind. Our scientists spent decades trying to understand it. Some theorized it was a weapon left over from a civilization predating the current galactic community. Others believed it was a natural phenomenon, something like a cosmic predator that had finally awakened. A few, the ones we dismissed as alarmists, suggested it might be intelligent in a way we simply could not comprehend. Whatever it was coming, and it was accelerating. I was promoted during those years, not through merit, but through attrition. The coordinator above me died when the consuming dark took Volanthis Prime, our cultural heart. The one above her perished defending the Kethrani shipyards. By the time I became first voice of the hegemony, I was speaking for a civilization that had already lost 1/3 of its population and half its industrial capacity. That was when we began reaching out to the other great powers. The Rothrani Collective agreed to joint defense protocols. They were consumed within 2 cycles. The Meshkari Dominion pledged their legendary fleets. They bought us 18 months before their homeworld went dark. The Tessari Federation, the Yulani Trade Consortium, the ancient and inscrutable observers of the deep, one by one they joined our coalition, and one by one they fell. 40 billion Valanthi had lived when the war began. When I first stepped aboard the human station, fewer than 8 billion remained. We had nowhere else to turn. I should explain why we had avoided humanity until that moment. It was not ignorance. We had continued monitoring Earth, updating our assessments every few decades as your species lurched from one crisis to another. We watched you develop nuclear weapons and almost immediately threaten to use them on yourselves. We watched you poison your own atmosphere, acidify your own oceans, drive thousands of your own subspecies to extinction through sheer carelessness. We watched your endless wars, your famines, your plagues, your capacity for cruelty that seemed to extend even to those you claimed to love. The hegemony's assessment was revised accordingly. Class 7 became Class 7X, pre-spaceflight, primitive, unstable, dangerous to themselves and others, a species to be contained rather than contacted. When you finally achieved faster-than-light travel, far ahead of our projections, I should note, we observed with something between fascination and horror. Your first interstellar vessels were crude things, barely held together by what our engineers dismissed as brute force engineering. You had not discovered gravity manipulation, or zero-point energy, or any of the elegant solutions that defined civilized propulsion. Instead, you had simply pushed harder, built stronger. Accepted risks that would have been unthinkable to any rational species. You expanded quickly, too quickly. You colonized worlds we had marked as unsuitable for habitation. You terraformed with methods that should not have worked. You adapted to environments that should have killed you. Within 3 centuries of your first interstellar flight, humanity had spread to 47 systems and showed no signs of slowing. We established a quarantine zone. It was not meant as an insult, though I suspect you saw it that way. It was simply prudence. The hegemony had encountered aggressive species before, and we knew how to manage them. We would wait until humanity had matured, had stabilized, had proven itself worthy of joining the galactic community. A few more centuries, perhaps, a millennium at most. We thought we had time. We were wrong about many things, but we were especially wrong about that. The station was called Far Horizon, and it orbited a gas giant in a system humanity had claimed only 80 years prior. By our standards, it was practically a frontier outpost. By any reasonable measure, it should have been crude, functional at best. It was neither. I will not pretend that my first impression of the station was awe. I was too exhausted for that, too grief-stricken, too desperate. But I remember noticing small things that did not fit the narrative I had been taught. The way the docking protocols were precisely efficient, the way the corridors were clean but not sterile, with small touches of color and comfort that suggested someone had actually thought about the people who would use them. The way the air tasted, somehow, like a planet I had never visited. My delegation consisted of 11 Valanthi, all that could be spared from the war effort. We had traveled for 3 months through increasingly hostile space to reach this place, and we had lost 2 ships along the way. I was accompanied by my aide, a young female named Sethani, who had been born on a world that no longer existed, and by the remnants of my diplomatic staff. We were met by 3 humans. I had studied the species, of course. I knew their basic morphology: bipedal, bilaterally symmetrical, startlingly similar to Volanthe in gross anatomy, but different in almost every detail that mattered. I knew they were carbon-based oxygen breathers, that their lifespans were measured in decades rather than centuries, that their sensory range was narrower than ours in some ways and broader in others. What I was not prepared for was their stillness. The leader of their delegation was a female named Sarah Chen. She was small by human standards. I would later learn this was considered unremarkable among her people, with dark hair cut short and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She wore a simple uniform without insignia or ornamentation, and when she spoke, her voice carried the particular quality of someone who had learned to make every word count. "First voice, Villanis Kethrin," she said. "On behalf of the United Earth Coalition, I welcome you to Far Horizon. I understand your journey was difficult." The words were formal, correct, entirely appropriate, but there was something in her tone that I could not quite identify. Later, I would realize it was compassion, not the performance of compassion, but the real thing, offered quietly and without expectation. "We are grateful for your willingness to receive us," I replied, following the ritual scripts that had governed first contact for millennia. "The Vilampi hegemony comes in peace, seeking mutual understanding and cooperation." Sarah Chen nodded slightly, as if she had expected exactly those words. "Please," she said, "come with me. You must be exhausted. We've prepared quarters for your delegation. The formal discussions can wait until you've had time to rest." It was such a small thing, such a human thing. We had expected demands. We had expected negotiations over the terms of our arrival, over what we would offer in exchange for their audience, over the precise protocols that would govern our interaction. We had prepared extensive briefing documents on human psychology, on their cultural obsession with status and dominance, on the ways we might appeal to their self-interest. Instead, they offered us rest. I should have understood then. I should have seen what that small gesture meant about who they were and how they saw the universe. But I was too tired, too focused on my mission, too certain of my own assumptions. "Thank you," I said. "We are indeed weary." Sethani leaned close to me as we walked. Her voice was barely a whisper, pitched below human hearing range. "First voice, something is wrong. They should be posturing, establishing dominance. This is not normal behavior for a primitive species encountering a superior civilization." "Perhaps they do not realize they are primitive," I murmured back. It was meant as a jest, a small relief from the tension. But Sethani did not smile, and as we walked through the station's corridors, I began to understand why. The walls were covered with displays showing star maps, fleet positions, resource allocations, the raw data of a civilization at war. I recognized some of it. The positions of our own fleets updated within the last few days, the territory controlled by the consuming dark, expanding inexorably across the galactic arm, the estimated casualties climbing higher with each refresh. They knew everything. They had been watching. The quarters they provided were comfortable, without being luxurious. The furniture had been adapted for Volanthe physiology with a precision that suggested they had studied us in detail. The lighting was adjustable across spectrums we found restful. The food dispensers offered 36 dishes from our homeworld, prepared with a fidelity that made Sethani weep quietly when she thought I could not hear. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I stood at the viewing port and watched the gas giant's endless storms, thinking about everything we had lost and everything we still might lose. 40 billion. That number had been higher when I boarded the ship 3 months ago. It would be lower by the time negotiations concluded. Every day brought new reports of worlds gone dark, of fleets vanished, of populations erased so completely that even their ruins did not survive. The Volanthi hegemony was dying, and I was here to beg primitives for help. The irony was not lost on me. In the morning, Sarah Chen came to collect me personally. She was accompanied by the same 2 humans who had met us at the dock, a male named David Okonkwo, who served as their military liaison, and a female named Yuki Tanaka, who I later learned was their senior diplomat. "I hope you were able to rest," Sarah said as we walked toward the conference chamber. "As much as circumstances permit," I replied. "The weight of responsibility does not lighten simply because one is far from home." She nodded, and again I saw that flicker of something in her eyes. "No, it doesn't." We walked in silence for a time, through corridors that hummed with quiet efficiency. I saw humans going about their business, technicians checking systems, officers reviewing data, civilians carrying children to what appeared to be educational facilities. None of them stopped to stare at us. None of them pointed or whispered or showed any sign of alarm at the alien beings in their midst. It was as if we were simply expected. "May I ask you something, First Voice?" Sarah said as we approached the conference chamber. "Of course." "Your species has existed for thousands of years. You've built an interstellar civilization that spans hundreds of worlds. You've developed technologies that make ours look like children's toys." She paused, and her voice grew softer. "Why did you wait so long to contact us? Why did you come only now when you're desperate?" The question struck me like a physical blow. Not because it was unfair, it was entirely fair, but because of the way she asked it. There was no accusation in her tone, no anger, no wounded pride, only curiosity, and perhaps a trace of sadness. "Because we were afraid of you," I said, and the honesty of my own words surprised me. Sarah Chen stopped walking. She turned to face me fully. And for a moment, there was nothing in the universe except her dark eyes and the weight of everything unsaid. "Afraid," she repeated. "You were unpredictable, aggressive. Your history suggested you would be dangerous if given access to advanced technology. We believed containment was the safest policy. We believed." I trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "You believed we weren't worth the risk," she finished for me. Her voice was gentle, but her words cut deep. "You looked at us and saw animals, primitives, savages who could not be trusted with the keys to the kingdom." "Yes. And now?" I thought about the question. I thought about the endless reports I had read, the cultural analyses in psychological profiles and strategic assessments that my predecessors had compiled over 8 centuries of observation. I thought about everything we had believed about humanity, and I thought about the woman standing before me, offering rest and comfort to the representatives of a civilization that had imprisoned her species for centuries. Now I am less certain than I have ever been about anything. Sarah Chen smiled, and it was the saddest smile I had ever seen. "Good," she said. "That's a start." The conference chamber was simple and functional, like everything else on the station. A single long table, surrounded by chairs adapted for both human and Volanthi physiology. Wall displays showing the same tactical data I had seen in the corridors. No ornamentation, no ceremonial trappings, no symbols of power or authority. My delegation took their places on one side of the table. The three humans sat across from us, with Sarah Chen in the center. Behind her, the displays showed the inexorable spread of the consuming dark, swallowing system after system as we prepared to speak. "Before we begin," Sarah said, "I want to be clear about something. Everything said in this room will be recorded and shared with the full United Earth Coalition within 12 hours. We operate on transparency. We believe it produces better outcomes than secrecy." I nodded. It was an unusual approach, but not unreasonable. "We also want you to understand," she continued, "that we have already been in contact with the surviving elements of the Rothrani Collective, the Meshkari Dominion, and the Tessari Federation. We know what you are facing. We know how bad it is. We know that you have lost worlds, fleets, and billions of lives trying to stop something that cannot be stopped by conventional means." Sithani stiffened beside me. "You have been communicating with our allies without informing us?" "They're not your allies anymore," David Okonkwo said quietly. "They are refugees. They came to us after their homeworlds fell. We have provided them sanctuary in exchange for information." The words hit like a shockwave. The Rothrani, the Meshkari, the Tessari, these were civilizations that had stood for millennia. To hear them described as refugees, as supplicants seeking shelter with the species we had dismissed as primitive. "How many?" I asked, my voice barely steady. 300 million Rothrani, 42 million Meshkari, 117 million Tessari. Yuki Tanaka consulted a display. "Their numbers are growing as more escape vessels arrive, but we estimate these are the majority of their surviving populations." I closed my eyes. 300 million Rothrani. Their civilization had numbered in the tens of billions. The Meshkari had been the greatest warriors in the known galaxy, their fleet the terror of the spiral arm. The Tessari had been old when my species was young, their archives containing the accumulated wisdom of ages. And now they were refugees, huddled in human space, dependent on human charity, because everything else had failed. "You understand, then," I said slowly, "what we have come to ask?" "You want an alliance," Sarah Chen replied. "You want our ships, our soldiers, our resources committed to the defense of what remains of your civilization. You want us to join your war." "Yes." She was silent for a long moment. Then she asked a question that I did not expect. "Why should we?" I stared at her. "Because if the consuming dark is not stopped, it will eventually reach your space as well. This is not merely our war, it is a war for the survival of all life in the galaxy." "That's true," Sarah said, "but it doesn't answer my question. You quarantined us for 800 years. You watched us from afar, cataloging our failures and dismissing our achievements. You considered us too dangerous to be trusted, too primitive to be partners. And now that you need us, you expect us to simply forget all of that? "We are offering you full membership in the galactic community," I said, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "Access to our technology, our knowledge, our trade networks, everything you have been denied." "Everything we were denied by you," David Okonkwo interrupted. "Let's be clear about that. You didn't just observe us from a distance, you actively blocked our expansion. You redirected our colony ships. You sabotaged our early diplomatic missions. We have records, First Voice. We know exactly what your hegemony did to keep us contained." I had not known they knew. The covert operations had been classified at the highest levels, conducted by specialists who had never been told why they were doing what they did. I had assumed, foolishly it now seemed, that humanity remained ignorant of our interference.
I cannot defend the actions of my predecessors, I said carefully. But I can tell you that the hegemony of today is not the same as the hegemony of centuries past. We have evolved. We have learned.
Have you? Sarah Chen asked quietly, because it seems to me that you came here expecting us to jump at the chance to serve you. You came here with gifts and promises, yes, but also with the assumption that we would be grateful for the opportunity to fight and die for a civilization that never bothered to treat us as equals. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at Sarah Chen, at her calm face and steady eyes, and I realized that I had made a catastrophic error. I had come to this place thinking of humans as primitives who needed to be persuaded, managed, manipulated into compliance. I had prepared arguments designed to appeal to their fear and their greed, their territorial instincts and their need for validation. I had not prepared for the possibility that they might simply refuse. "What do you want?" I asked, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic maneuvering. "Tell me what you want, and I will do everything in my power to provide it." Sarah Chen leaned forward. Her voice was soft, but every word carried weight. "We want an apology."
Not a diplomatic apology, not a carefully worded statement crafted by your legal team to minimize liability. A real apology, First Voice. An acknowledgement of what was done to us and why it was wrong. An acknowledgement that we were never the threat you claimed we were, that we were simply different and you punished us for it.
I opened my mouth to respond, but she was not finished. "We want the quarantine lifted, completely and permanently. We want free access to all hegemony space, all trade routes, all technology, not as gifts, but as rights. The same rights you extended to every other species in the galactic community except us." "That can be arranged. We want the other species to know what you did." Her voice hardened slightly. "We want the Rothrani refugees in our space to understand why humanity was never there to help them fight. We want the Meshkari survivors to know that we would have stood beside them if your hegemony had allowed it. We want the truth, First Voice, all of it, shared openly with every surviving member of the galactic community." I felt the weight of her demands pressing down on me. The apology would be humiliating. The access would be costly. But the truth would destroy what remained of the hegemony's moral authority. It would make us not just the civilization that failed to stop the consuming dark, but the civilization that had actively prevented others from trying. "And if I agree to these terms," I asked, "then we'll discuss the possibility of an alliance." Sarah Chen's expression did not change. "But I want you to understand something, First Voice. Whatever we decide, it will be our decision, not because we're afraid of the consuming dark, and not because we want your technology or your approval. It will be because we believe it's the right thing to do." She stood, and her human colleagues stood with her. "We'll give you time to consider our terms. In the meantime, you and your delegation are welcome to remain on the station. The facilities are at your disposal. We'll reconvene in 48 hours. And with that, they left. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. I consulted with my delegation. We debated the terms, analyzed the implications, projected the outcomes. Sathani argued that we should refuse, that the demands were unreasonable, that humanity was trying to humiliate us in our moment of weakness. Others counseled acceptance, pointing out that we had no alternatives and no leverage. I spent most of my time alone, staring at the tactical displays and watching the consuming dark grow. The reports that filtered in during those 48 hours were devastating. Volanthus Secondary had fallen. The shipyards at Kethrin Orbital, named for my own ancestral line, had been consumed. The Fourth Fleet, our last major offensive force, had been destroyed attempting to hold the perihelion corridor. By the time we reconvened with the humans, the Volanthi hegemony had lost another 200 million souls. I agreed to every term. I apologized. Not with the careful words my advisors had prepared, but with the raw honesty of a being who had finally understood the depth of his civilization's failure. I admitted what we had done and why. I acknowledged that humanity had never been the threat we claimed, that our fear had been a reflection of our own inadequacies rather than any objective assessment of human nature. I watched Sarah Chen's face as I spoke, searching for some sign of triumph or vindication. I saw neither, only a quiet sadness, and perhaps, though I could not be certain, a trace of respect. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "Thank you, First Voice. I know that wasn't easy." "It was necessary," I replied, "and long overdue." "Yes." She paused. "It was." There was a moment of silence, not uncomfortable, but weighted with everything that had passed between us. So I said finally, "Will you help us?" Sarah Chen looked at her colleagues. David Okonkwo gave a slight nod. Yuki Tanaka inclined her head, in what I had learned was a human gesture of agreement. "We've discussed your request extensively," Sarah said, turning back to me. "We've analyzed your tactical data, consulted with the refugee populations in our space, and evaluated our own capabilities." She paused, and something shifted in her expression. The warmth that had been present, however restrained, seemed to drain away, replaced by something harder and more distant. "The United Earth Coalition has decided that we cannot accept your terms for an alliance." The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything, the humiliation, the apology, the admission of guilt, they were refusing? "I don't understand," I managed. "We gave you everything you asked for." "You gave us everything we asked for as a precondition for discussion," Sarah said, "not as a guarantee of alliance. Those are different things." "Then what more do you want?" I heard the desperation in my own voice and hated it. "Name your price. Whatever it is, we will pay it." "There is no price," First Voice said. Sarah's voice was gentle but immovable. "We are not refusing because you have failed to meet some hidden standard. We are refusing because your terms for alliance are unacceptable to us." "What terms? We came to beg for help, not to impose conditions." "You came asking us to join your war," she interrupted, "to integrate our forces into your command structure, to follow your strategic directives and defer to your military leadership. That is unacceptable." I stared at her, understanding slowly dawning. "You would not be content to serve as auxiliaries." "No." "You want command." Sarah Chen shook her head. "We don't want command of your forces, First Voice. We don't want to tell the Volanthi how to fight, or the Rothrani how to die. We want to fight our own war, in our own way, according to our own judgment." That's not how it works," I said, hearing the confusion in my own voice. "Coalition warfare requires unified command. Competing strategies lead to defeat. If we do not coordinate, then perhaps we should not coordinate." She stood, and her colleagues stood with her. "The United Earth Coalition appreciates your apology and your offers of access and cooperation. We will honor those agreements, regardless of what follows. But we will not join your war, first voice. We will not fight under your banner or follow your orders. Then what will you do? I asked, barely able to form the words. Sarah Chen walked to the door. She paused there, her hand on the frame, and looked back at me with those dark, unreadable eyes. We will do what we have always done, she said. What we were doing long before you noticed us. What we would have continued doing if you had never come. And what is that? Survive. She walked out. The door closed behind her. Earth had walked out of the negotiations. I remained in my seat for a long time after they left. My delegation spoke around me, their voices rising in confusion and anger and fear. Sathani was demanding to know what had just happened. Others were calling for immediate departure, for alternative approaches, for anything that might salvage the situation. I heard none of it. I was remembering something from the survey reports, those ancient documents I had signed without reading centuries ago. The survey team had noted something unusual about Earth's species distribution. Most worlds with advanced life developed a single dominant species relatively early in their evolutionary history. Earth had developed dozens of competing hominid species, and one of them, Homo sapiens, had outlasted all the others. The report had described this as evidence of humanity's aggressive nature, proof that they were dangerous, that they would destroy any rivals for dominance. I wondered now if the survey team had understood what they were actually documenting. First voice? I looked up. Sathani was standing beside me, her face drawn with worry. We should prepare to depart, she said. There is nothing more to accomplish here. Perhaps, I murmured. Or perhaps we should stay and watch. Watch what? I did not answer. I was not certain myself. But something in Sarah Chen's final words had unsettled me in a way I could not quite define. There had been no boasting, no threats, no promises of retribution. Just that quiet statement of intent. We will survive. It should have sounded like bravado, coming from a species that had been spacefaring for less than 4 centuries, facing a threat that had destroyed civilizations thousands of years old. It should have been laughable. It was not. We stayed. It was not a rational decision, and my delegation objected strenuously. We should have been returning to Valanthi space, coordinating what remained of our defenses, preparing for the final stand that everyone knew was coming. Instead, I kept finding reasons to delay, minor mechanical issues with our ships, diplomatic protocols that needed to be observed, 100 small excuses that allowed us to remain on Far Horizon and watch. Over the following weeks, I began to notice things. The station was busier than it had been when we arrived. More ships coming and going, more humans moving through the corridors with purpose. The tactical displays were being updated more frequently, showing data I did not fully understand. I requested access to their communications network. The request was granted without hesitation, with a thoroughness that surprised me. They gave us everything. News feeds, military updates, political debates, even personal communications from citizens discussing the crisis with friends and family. What I found there was remarkable. There was fear, yes. The consuming dark was coming and everyone knew it. But alongside the fear was something else. A kind of controlled determination that I had not seen in any other species facing extinction. Humans were not panicking. They were not descending into chaos or despair. They were organizing. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were retooling for military production. Research institutions were sharing data openly, breaking down the barriers of competition that had defined their academic culture. Citizens were volunteering for training programs, civilian defense initiatives, resource conservation efforts. The entire species seemed to be shifting, rearranging itself like an organism responding to a threat. And everywhere, in every communication, I found the same phrase repeated like a mantra.
We will hold. Not we will win. Not we will triumph. Just we will hold.
It took me far too long to understand what that meant. The first engagement between human forces and the consuming dark came 3 months after I arrived at Far Horizon. The battle took place in a system that had been part of the Rothrani Collective, a mining colony that had been abandoned when the Rothrani fled. The consuming dark had been moving toward human space for weeks, and everyone expected it to simply consume the empty system and continue on. Instead, a human fleet was waiting. I watched the battle from the station's observation center, surrounded by my delegation and a dozen human officers who had been assigned to brief us. The tactical display showed what our sensors could detect, which, it turned out, was not very much. Human ships were smaller and less elegant than ours, their weapons less sophisticated, their shields weaker. On paper, they should have been no match for the consuming dark. But they fought anyway. The battle lasted 7 hours. The humans lost 32 ships and 800 personnel. The consuming dark lost something. The tactical analysts could not agree on what exactly. A portion of its mass had been destroyed or dispersed. A tendril of its advance had been severed. The damage was real, if difficult to quantify. More importantly, the human fleet had not been destroyed. It had retreated in good order, maintaining formation, covering its wounded vessels. It had fought the consuming dark to a standstill and lived to tell about it. This should not have been possible. How? I asked one of the human officers, a young male named Reyes who had been assigned as our liaison. Your technology is inferior to ours in every measurable way. How did you survive? Reyes looked at me with an expression I could not read. Because we expected to die, he said. I did not understand. The Valanthi approach to warfare is based on calculated risk, he explained. You commit forces only when the expected outcome justifies the cost. You retreat when losses exceed acceptable parameters. You preserve strength for future engagements. This is the rational approach.
It is an approach, Reyes agreed. But it assumes that retreat is always an option, that there is always a future engagement to preserve strength for, that survival is always possible if you just make the right calculations. He paused. We don't assume any of those things. We never have.
I still don't understand. Reyes was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. My grandmother was born in a refugee camp. My grandfather survived a genocide. My mother was a soldier in a war that never officially ended, and my father was a medical worker who died trying to save people during a pandemic that killed hundreds of millions. He looked at the tactical display, at the human ships regrouping for their next engagement. Every human alive carries that kind of history, First Voice. We are all descended from people who survived when they should not have, from people who fought when fighting was hopeless, from people who kept going when reason said there was no point. He shrugged. You call us primitive. You call us aggressive. You say we are dangerous. And you are right about all of those things. But you are missing the most important thing about us. And what is that? We don't know how to give up. We never learned. Over the following months, I watched as humanity fought the consuming dark in ways that defied everything I had been taught about warfare. They used tactics that our military analysts dismissed as suicidal: ramming attacks, close-range detonations, boarding actions against an enemy that consumed all organic matter on contact. They sacrificed ships to buy seconds of tactical advantage. They held positions that could not be held, defended objectives that were not worth defending, died in numbers that would have broken any other species. And they won.
Not every battle, not even most battles, but they won enough. They slowed the consuming dark's advance. They forced it to pay for every light year of space it consumed. They learned from every engagement, adapting their tactics with a speed that stunned our observers.
I began attending their strategic briefings, not as a negotiator, those discussions were over, but as an observer, trying to understand what I was seeing. The humans welcomed me with the same calm courtesy they showed everyone, offering explanations that helped me follow what was happening without ever revealing more than they chose to.
At one of these briefings, I met the human they called the architect.
His name was James Webb, and he was old by human standards, over 90 years, which I had learned was considered extraordinary for their species. His body had been augmented with mechanical components that allowed him to continue functioning, and his mind had been enhanced with neural interfaces that gave him direct access to their tactical networks. But these details were secondary to the quality that truly defined him. James Webb was, quite simply, the most brilliant strategic mind I had ever encountered. He had been designing humanity's defense against the consuming dark for decades, long before anyone else believed the threat was real. He had studied every engagement we had fought, analyzed every defeat we had suffered, and constructed a theory of the consuming dark's nature that went far beyond anything our scientists had achieved. "It's not alive in any conventional sense," he told me during one of our conversations, "but it's not purely mechanical either. It's something in between, a system that processes information and responds to stimuli, but without consciousness as we understand it. It doesn't hate us, it doesn't want to destroy us, it simply feeds. We are incidental to its purpose."
Can it be stopped? I asked.
"Everything can be stopped," Webb replied. "The question is always what you're willing to pay."
"And what are you willing to pay?" He looked at me with those old augmented eyes, and I saw something there that I did not have a name for. "Whatever is necessary," he said. "Whatever it takes, as long as it takes."
The war ground on.
I remained at Far Horizon, sending reports back to what remained of Valanthe Command, watching as humanity did the impossible over and over again. Other observers began to arrive: Rathrani, Meshkari, Tessari, representatives of species I had never encountered, all drawn by the same impossible hope. The humans treated them all the same way they had treated me, with courtesy, with respect, with that quiet confidence that I had once mistaken for arrogance. They shared everything: tactics, technologies, strategic insights. They asked nothing in return except that their allies fight well. They accepted losses that would have shattered our civilization without complaint. They mourned their dead and continued fighting. I watched Sarah Chen, who had become one of their primary military leaders, command a fleet action that saved 11 million Tessari refugees. She lost 400 ships and 20,000 personnel. When the battle was over, she stood in the observation deck looking at the stars, and I saw tears running down her face. "I'm sorry," I said, not knowing what else to say. "Don't be." Her voice was hoarse. "They did their job. They held the line. They gave everyone else time to escape." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "That's all any of us can do." "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" She was silent for a long moment. "Every day," she said finally.
Every single day, I wonder if any of this matters, if we're just delaying the inevitable, if everything we're sacrificing is just pointless.
And what do you conclude?
She looked at me, and despite the tears, despite the exhaustion, there was something unbreakable in her eyes. I conclude that it doesn't matter whether it's worth it. It doesn't matter whether we win or lose. What matters is that we try, that we fight, that we do everything we can for as long as we can, because that's who we are. She paused. Does that make sense to you, First Voice?
I'm beginning to think it does. The turning point came 2 years into the war.
I was in the Strategic Command Center when James Webb presented his final plan to the combined military leadership of what remained of the galactic community. The room was packed with beings from a dozen species, all of them exhausted, all of them terrified, all of them clinging to the same impossible hope.
The consuming dark is not invulnerable, Webb said, his voice calm despite the weight of what he was proposing. It can be damaged, disrupted, even destroyed. But conventional attacks are insufficient. We cannot defeat it through attrition. It has too much mass, too many resources, too great an ability to regenerate. He activated a holographic display showing the core of the consuming dark, a region of space so densely packed with its substance that no probe had ever returned.
This is its heart. Not a brain, not a command center, but a processing nexus. Damage it, and the entire structure loses coherence. Not permanently, it would regenerate eventually, but long enough for us to evacuate, regroup, and develop more permanent solutions.
How do we damage something we cannot approach? Asked one of the Rothrani observers.
We approach it, Webb replied simply. We fly a fleet directly into the core, carrying weapons specifically designed to disrupt its structure at the quantum level. We detonate those weapons at the nexus point, and we accept whatever losses are necessary to ensure the mission succeeds.
The room went silent. What you are proposing, I said slowly, is a suicide mission on a scale that defies comprehension.
Yes.
How many ships?
The entire human fleet.
The silence deepened. I looked around the room and saw the same expression on every face. Disbelief, horror, and beneath it all, a terrible kind of hope.
You would sacrifice everything, I said.
We would sacrifice our fleet, Webb corrected. Our ships, our soldiers, but not everything. The civilians, the non-combatants, the children, they will survive. They will be protected in safe zones that we have been preparing for years. They will continue, even if we do not.
And if the mission fails?
Then they will continue anyway. His voice was steady. They will find another way. They always do. I thought about everything I had learned about humanity over the past 2 years. Their history of struggle, their capacity for sacrifice, their refusal to accept defeat even when defeat seemed inevitable.
You have been planning this from the beginning? I said. Since before you arrived, First Voice. Since before the consuming dark entered our region of space. We knew it would come eventually. We knew we would not be able to stop it through conventional means, so we prepared for this.
The negotiations, I whispered, understanding dawning. You refused our alliance because we could not guarantee that you would support a plan this extreme, because your strategic doctrine would not allow for acceptable losses on this scale, because we needed freedom of action that operating under your command would not have permitted.
Sarah Chen spoke from beside him.
We were never going to let the galaxy fall, First Voice. We were never going to stand by and watch. But we knew that when the moment came, we would have to act alone, because no one else would be willing to do what needed to be done.
I stared at them. These primitive, aggressive, dangerous beings who'd been watching from behind our quarantine for 8 centuries, who had never stopped preparing for this moment, who had known, even as they walked out of our negotiations, that they would eventually fight and die for a galaxy that had never treated them as equals.
"Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why would you sacrifice so much for species that fear and despise you?"
Sarah Chen looked at me with those dark, unreadable eyes.
"Because you are alive," she said simply. "Because you feel and think and dream and love and hope. Because you matter, whether you believe it or not. Whether you treat us well or poorly." She paused. "That is what you never understood about us, First Voice. We don't fight because we hate our enemies. We fight because we love what they would destroy." The final battle lasted 3 weeks. I watched from far horizon as the human fleet, every ship they had, every vessel that could still fly, converged on the core of the consuming dark. They went in waves, each wave buying time for the next, each crew knowing that they would not return. 40,000 ships. 12 million personnel, everything humanity had built in 4 centuries of spacefaring, committed to a single desperate gamble.
And behind them came the refugees, the Velanthi, the Rathrani, the Meshkari, the Tessari, every surviving member of the galactic community, armed with whatever weapons they had left, following humanity into the dark.
Not because they were ordered to, not because they were obligated, but because they had finally understood what I had understood in that conference room.
Because it was the right thing to do. The final transmission from the human flagship came through just before they entered the core. It was James Webb's voice, old and tired and unimaginably brave. "To all surviving members of the galactic community, the United Earth Coalition thanks you for your support. Whatever happens in the next few hours, know that we have no regrets. We did what we were born to do." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "To the children who will inherit whatever remains, I'm sorry we couldn't give you a better galaxy. I'm sorry we couldn't protect you from all of this. But I want you to know that every human who dies today does so believing that you will find a way forward, that you will build something beautiful from the ashes, that you will make all of this mean something." Another pause, longer this time. Earth walked out of those negotiations 2 years ago because we knew this moment would come. We knew that the galaxy would tremble at what we were about to do. But we also knew that trembling is just the beginning. After the trembling comes the standing. After the standing comes the walking. His voice grew stronger. "After the walking comes the running. And one day, maybe not in my lifetime, maybe not in yours, there will come a day when you run so fast and so far that nothing in this universe can catch you. That is what we are fighting for. That is what we are dying for. That is what humanity has always been for." The transmission cut out. The tactical display showed the human fleet entering the core of the consuming dark, and then there was nothing but light. The explosion was visible across half the galaxy. For 3 days, the sensors were too overloaded to tell us anything useful. We waited in silence, watching the light fade, praying to gods we had almost forgotten. When the data finally came through, I wept. The core was gone. Not damaged, not disrupted,
gone. The consuming dark, that inexorable horror that had devoured 1,000 worlds, was collapsing in on itself like a wave receding from shore. It would not disappear entirely. The quantum disruption was not complete, but it would take centuries to regenerate, centuries for the survivors to prepare, to develop new weapons, to ensure it never threatened them again.
Humanity had won. The cost was beyond comprehension. Of the 40,000 ships that had entered the core, fewer than 200 emerged. Of the 12 million personnel, barely 300,000 survived. The fleet that had held the galaxy together for 2 years was gone, scattered into debris that would drift between the stars forever. But they had won. And in winning, they had changed everything. I returned to Volanthi space 3 months later, traveling on a human transport because our own ships were too damaged to make the journey. The galaxy, I found, was unrecognizable. The quarantine zones were gone. Human ships moved freely through what remained of our territory, carrying aid and supplies and hope. Human engineers were helping us rebuild our shattered infrastructure. Human diplomats were negotiating new treaties, new alliances, new frameworks for cooperation that would have been unthinkable before the war. And everywhere I went, I heard the same story. They came for us, a Rothrani survivor told me. When we had nothing left, when everyone else had abandoned us, they came. They fought and died for people they had never met, for species that had treated them like animals. I don't understand it, a Tasari elder admitted. Their philosophy, their motivations, their willingness to sacrifice, none of it makes sense according to our models. They should not exist, and yet they do. They are what we should have been, a young Volanthi whispered. And I had no argument to offer. It has been 50 years since the Battle of the Core. I am old now, even by Volanthi standards. My body is failing, and I know that I will not live to see another century. But I have seen enough. I have lived long enough to understand what happened to us and what it means. Earth walked out of those negotiations because they knew something we did not. They knew that the galaxy was not going to be saved by treaties or alliances or carefully coordinated military campaigns. It was going to be saved by beings willing to do whatever was necessary, pay whatever price was demanded, sacrifice whatever needed to be sacrificed. The galaxy trembled when they walked out, because deep down, we understood what that meant. We understood that they were not refusing to help us, they were refusing to be controlled by us. They were claiming the right to fight their own war, in their own way, on their own terms. And when they did, they showed us what we had forgotten over 11,000 years of civilization. They showed us what it means to be alive. I am writing this account so that future generations will understand, so that when the histories are written and the legends are told, there will be at least one voice from the old order who tells the truth about what happened. We thought we were the pinnacle of galactic civilization. We thought we had achieved everything that could be achieved, understood everything that could be understood. We were wrong. The humans were never primitive. They were never simple. They were never the threat we imagined them to be. They were something far more terrifying and far more beautiful. A species that had been forged in struggle, tempered by suffering, and shaped by an endless series of catastrophes that would have destroyed any other beings. They survived because they did not know how to die. They fought because they did not know how to surrender.
They saved us because they did not know how to abandon those in need, even when those in need had abandoned them first.
And now they walk among us, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as partners, as friends, as the unexpected gift that the universe gave to a galaxy that did not deserve it.
Earth walked out of negotiations. The galaxy trembled.
And then, slowly, hesitantly, we learned to walk beside them.
We are still learning. I think we always will be. My name is Villanis Kithron. I was old when humanity was young, and I am older now than I ever expected to be. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched civilizations crumble to dust. I have lived through horrors that would have driven lesser beings to madness.
But I have also seen something that I never expected to see. I have seen a species born in fire choose to offer warmth instead of burning. I have seen the victims of injustice choose mercy instead of vengeance. I have seen the weak become strong, and the strong become gentle, and the gentle become the mightiest force the galaxy has ever known.
I have seen humanity, and I am grateful.
The stars are quiet now, or as quiet as stars ever are. The consuming dark sleeps, diminished but not destroyed, waiting for the day when it might wake again. But that day is far off, and when it comes, we will be ready. We will be ready because humanity taught us how to prepare. We will be ready because they showed us what preparation really means. We will be ready because they walked out of negotiations and into legend, and they took us with them. Earth walked out of negotiations. The galaxy trembled. But trembling, as it turns out, was just the beginning. After the trembling came the standing. After the standing came the walking. After the walking came the running. And now, at last, we are learning to fly.